Thank you for coming. And,
Thank you.
I think the first question will be obvious is, can you tell us a bit about Chance Capital and maybe a few words about yourself?
Sure. So Chance Capital has been running for nearly 2 years. It's a regulated corporate advisor. And in a nutshell, we raise capital for SMEs, so small and medium-sized enterprises. Generally speaking, we're raising Series B, so not startup capital, but a couple of steps up the ladder for businesses raising between 1 and 50 million. And this was born out of my experience working for an investment bank, and previous to that in the city for an asset management firm. Office arms, I was looking after family offices, and I've always wanted to create my own business in the same space. And so after leaving the investment bank, I was able to start Chance Capital just under 2 years ago. And it wasn't doing anything completely different. It was taking the investors that I built up over the last 15 years or so, and then raising capital for SMEs.
My next question is, I've actually looked into your profile, and I know you also own a business called iStock Sport. So I really was curious about that, and it's because it's something that maybe interests our young generation, the sport and leisure show. So maybe you can tell also a few words about that.
Sure. Well, I think the premise to that is that we are an agnostic broker. So what do I mean by that? We look at all sorts of different sectors. We don't cover oil and gas so much, or fashion. But one area which I'm interested in exploring is whether we can partner with sector specialists in different sectors. So in this instance, there's the largest sports network in the world called iSport Connect. They have 26,000 members, and they run events throughout the world. And they approached me in saying that they have a number of sports and leisure opportunities, but they don't have the regulated conduit to connect investors with sports opportunities. So we partnered with them last year, and we created iSport Connect Capital on a 50-50 joint venture basis to promote sports and leisure businesses to that targeted demographic of investors.
Any particular example that you can tell us about? Well, I'm sure like everyone would be interested to know if they just a startup or starting their career in the financial sector or in sports and leisure sector, and if they want to raise a capital, what would be the first step?
Sure. Well, I think to give an example of a sports business, at the moment we're raising capital for Rugby Europe, which is the governing body for rugby in Europe. So it's quite a unique opportunity. We're also looking at a swimming business, and all sorts of different sports disciplines, everything down to ticketing apps. So on the sports joint venture, iSport Connect Capital, we're looking at a number of really interesting opportunities. With regards to Chance Capital, the sectors are far more broad. So we have everything from accountancy, private jets, car leasing, all sorts of other businesses. So I probably see around 20 businesses every week, and we take on maybe 1 or 2 every month. So we have to be very careful about which ones we think are credible, compelling. And in terms of what we look for, it's very much the team that you're investing in. And with regards to advice to people wanting to start their own businesses, we're slightly later stage, what we call Series B. So we're looking at businesses which are a little further down the track. But there's a whole raft of advice I could give for startups, which would probably take a bit longer than when we have. But
what type of businesses would be attracted to work with Chance Capital?
Well, as I alluded to, any investor is investing in the people. And so the most important thing is not how good the business plan is, or not how impressive the data room or the financials are. It's how compelling and credible the people are, the management team. If you're putting in a minimum of £1 million, you want to make sure that the people you're investing in are credible and you believe in the flight plan that they have for that business. So that's the most important thing. What we look for, of course, there are certain metrics that we look for in terms of turnover and EBITDA and profitability. But in general, we'll look at any business that has a clear track record, ideally 2 or 3 years of turnover. And in terms of the businesses of why they're attracted to us, we hope that the investors that we're bringing to the table are strategic investors. So these are guys, in other words, who are bringing far more than just capital to the business. They're bringing sector expertise, contacts, whatever it may be. And so when they join the business as a shareholder, they're able to boost ultimately their own shareholder value by adding a whole lot more value to the business.
Can you tell us a bit more about your day? Like, how do you start, and maybe a little bit about your team?
Sure. Well, my days are always different. Every day is completely different. And even the day itself is from one meeting I might be focusing on a private jet mandate, the next hour I'm focusing on a rugby deal or whatever it may be at that point in time, so I'm constantly having to adjust to whatever the requirement is. I would say that in terms of where I'm based, it's very much London-centric. We are regulated for a number of different markets, mainly European markets, by the FCA, so we're regulated for professional investors. So we've just taken on a business which is based in Spain, but they're domiciled in Malta. So I would say most of my days are based around Mayfair, the city where a lot of the ecosystem of family offices and venture capital is based.
Do you have any recommendations when you start a new business?
Absolutely. I think one of the best things that I did, if I can say so, was the time I had of a non-compete clause between leaving my last job at the investment bank and starting Chance Capital, which was a 3-month term of non-compete, was to use that time to speak to as many people that I respected as possible. There's nothing quite like free advice. So I'd really encourage any student or anyone who's looking to start their own business to talk to people who they respect. Even if it's not in the sector that they're looking to start the business up in, but in terms of advice, right down to what software you might use, because it's invaluable, and I think that's a really important thing. Rather than thinking you know all the answers, you probably don't, and it's very good to filter advice from people that you respect and trust.
What advice you can give to our students starting a career in financial services?
I think, well, first thing to say is there are a myriad of different opportunities and roles within the financial sector. But I would say a very good place to start is to gain experience working for different firms, financial companies. I've already mentioned that speaking to individuals within the sector and getting free advice is always a very good place to start. But I would say really test the water in the different areas, subsectors of finance. By gaining work experience. I think a very good thing to do in my world and what I tried to do 15 years ago when I started working in the financial sector was building up my book of investors. And for me right now, that is the lifeblood of what we do at Chance Capital. Without the investor relationships that we have, we would find it very, very difficult to operate. So I think it's always a very good thing to understand the mindset of an investor, whether it be an institutional investor or a private investor. So I think networking and work experience at a plethora of different firms would be really useful.
One of my favorite questions is, what type of advice can you give yourself if you were 20?
I would say, well, first up, don't be afraid of failing. And I think that's a really important mindset to have. Undoubtedly there will be a few failures along the path, and it's about learning from them and carrying on. And the second piece of advice would be, don't necessarily wait too long to create your own business. If that's something that you truly want to do, and it's not for everyone, but if it's something you truly want to do, it could happen sooner rather than later. So I think there are certain things you can do to gain experience, to broaden your network. But I think if I was talking to myself at 21, I'd say go for it, maybe sooner rather than later, and don't be afraid of failing.